So, thank you. Not that that would ever happen, but you know.
All right, folks, I'm going to call this legislative budget hearing 1 call to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hanauer Friedman,
Here.
Ingram,
Here.
Locke,
Here.
Lockshin,
Here.
Michaels, Pugh,
Here.
Rodriguez, Rogers,
Present.
Sexton, Storr,
Present.
Straub,
Here.
Taylor,
Here.
Thorsland,
Here.
Vanich Thirana,
Here.
Wilson,
Here.
Carter, Cowart,
Here.
Esri, Farney,
Here.
Fortato, Goss, Patterson.
We have a quorum. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? It would be Straub, seconded by Vanish Theranot. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Budget presentations, and we will start with our coroner.
Good evening. All right. Mine's probably going to be pretty simple tonight. There's not much different in my budget from last year other than some increases. Toxicology services, we use a forensics lab. There's only a handful of qualified forensic labs in the U.S. that can perform the testing that we need done, and we use a contract with them that we get the same pricing as all the coroners in Illinois. So I don't have much control over that fee, and it went up this year, so we had to increase my toxicology budget from $52,500 to $66,000 to accommodate for the next 2-year contract. And then waste disposal fees that are in accordance with our autopsy services. I'm required to use waste disposal services for biohazard materials, and there's always an annual increase in that. The most significant thing, though, in my general fund budget is the first highlight, professional services or our autopsy services. I was notified in June of this year that my pathologist is retiring in December, or semi-retiring. He's moving out of the area, which means I'm not going to have a pathologist possibly after December unless I can get another pathologist to come into this area and provide those services. That could potentially create a huge increase in our budget as far as expenses, because if we're not able to provide those services in-house, that means we have to travel to other counties in the area and have those services provided for us. The other thing that happened was as soon as my pathologist announced he was leaving, the closest pathology services, which are Bloomington and Kankakee and Springfield, I received a letter that they sent out to all their staff saying their services were going up in cost next year. So it's practically doubling in cost starting next year. So that also increases the cost for us, because any pathologist I might be able to bring into the area is going to want to make a comparable salary the same as other pathologists in this area. So currently we were charging, or our pathologist was charging $850 an autopsy. That's going up to $1,200, and their morgue fees and their assistant fees are all going up as well. So I estimate that our total cost is going to be about $186,000 for autopsy services. If we have an in-house pathologist, if we have to travel outside of the area, there's additional fees that I have to pay, like the morgue use fee and so forth that we charge other counties. We would have to pay that to another county, so that's going to jump our total cost to about $271,000. I just have no way of knowing if I'm going to be able to get somebody in by then or not. There's currently, I sent some copies of some open positions throughout the U.S. out today. Those positions are ranging from the lowest end, $250,000 to $400,000 for pathologists, and there's probably 40 of those positions at least opened up in the U.S. right now, including Florida, Hawaii, Arizona, Massachusetts. So unless somebody's from Illinois and wants to move back to this area, I think it's going to be a little bit of a trick to get somebody to come back here and provide those services. Our pathologist is an independent contractor, so he bills those counties. I did talk to Steve and Michelle during our budget hearing, and Tammy, I believe, about looking at whether we could fund a pathologist as a salaried employee and whether we can offset those costs with the fees that we charge out. I'm still working on those fees. It's not an equal, flip-flop for how we bring them in and what we pay versus what it would cost us to have somebody in-house. But I'm still trying to put those numbers together and see if we could work those numbers to where it wouldn't be as big a hit on the county budget, where we would provide the same services we always provide. We would charge other counties, but those fees that we charge other counties would help offset the fee for our pathologists. So it's a possibility. I'm not overly confident that that's going to happen, whether we're going to go down that road or not. The problem is I'm not overly confident that I'm going to find a qualified pathologist that wants to come to Central Illinois when there's all those other positions that are open throughout the U.S. that can't be filled either. So that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of the general fund budget. Again, it'll be a decrease in revenue, definitely, if we're not providing those services. The autopsy services we provide bring in roughly $66,000, give or take, depending on how many autopsies we provide for other counties. That would jump to, I think I had it on there, maybe not, or $89,000 to $95,000, somewhere in there. Again, it's hard to estimate that because I don't know how many, it's up to the other coroners when they need to do an autopsy and if they want us to provide those services. So That's kind of an estimate. It could be higher than that. It just depends. We've seen a gradual increase every year in the number of autopsies we're providing, but we also have the difficulty where even if we bring in a pathologist that works for the county, the national standards for pathologists limit their autopsies to between 250 and 350 apiece. We did 371 last year. So if they want to be meeting their national standards, they need to stay down closer to 350. So that kind of limits us to what we're doing without them saying they need assistance. And then they need to go to professional continuing education as well, just like everybody else. They need vacation. We have to cover while they're gone and so forth. So that pretty much sums up the highlights of the general fund. Our other fund is a special revenue fund according to statute. We did see an increase in that mid-year. There was a bill that was passed last year in the legislature that increased the fees that are collected for cremation permits, and any fees that we collect from autopsy reports and toxicology, so forth, go into that fund. So we actually had a mid-year increase. It took effect July 1st of this year. So my original estimates last year for how much revenue we were going to bring in were lower because we didn't know we were going to get that law passed. So that fund will continue to bring in a higher amount going forward. We'll have a full year's worth of that fund next year. So those are my estimates. They may be a little low. I tend to estimate it a tad bit low because I hate to overshoot and then come in under, but that's based on Public Act 103-0029. And really our most significant thing also is we have 2 vehicles out of 4 that are in pretty bad shape that we're going to have to replace next year, which they typically would be replaced out of this fund now. But we will have to replace those because we're seeing a lot of repairs, and they're 2007 and 2010 models, so we've really overshot their life expectancy. So any questions about either one of those budgets or funds?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
So just maybe more of a comment on your first issue, the idea about trying to bring the person in-house. I mean, it's no secret, I've never been in love with your pathologist, but I understand it's a limited pool. But I do think we as a county, I want to express that I think we as a county should prioritize having somebody that is ours. And if that means that we need to put some more resources to it, I just understand the nature of other counties. If we're farming this all out to other counties, that often is going to mean we're going to be at the end of their list, right? And I think that, you know, we saw this during the pandemic, the difficulty of getting people their death certificates and everything, and through no fault of our own. But I think that prioritizing that and figuring out financially, like if we need to put a little bit of money to that, I would like to signal to you that that's something I think that would be worth investing in. I do think that the cost of living here is a lot lower than some of those big cities. So, you know, $200,000 here spends a lot better than $200,000 in Miami. But as you're working on that math, if you want to keep the finance committee in the loop, I know we might not be able to answer that in this budget process, but if we need to come back to this outside of the budget process in order to make this happen, because I understand, like, right now you're asking for the money to continue to be in contractual services, which makes sense to me. But if halfway through next year, we could come up with a proposal that's reasonable, that isn't going to destroy the rest of our budget, I think that, you know, if it's $400,000, it's a whole nother conversation. But if we can get this done and have somebody in-house, I think it would be advantageous to us. And I think maybe if we're offering benefits and all of that, that maybe it would be more attractive than do you want to move here to be a contractor, right?
And that's absolutely right. Most of the jobs that are out there are
Right.
employee jobs that have vacation,
Right.
sick time, retirement.
As they
So
should.
trying to convince a pathologist to come here on a contractual basis, they have to basically do their own retirement. It's just not, it's not real enticing for most people.
I guess I would say I would like us to try that methodology and all the way through to trying to get somebody in-house and find out it's impossible before we just decide to just continue to contract out. So that would be, that's just me speaking, but I see other people nodding. But that to me is, as finance chair, I wanted to signal that to you. My other question is, I did see that the fee going up in like one of my NACO 10 million emails I get a day, it seems like, from them. And it went right up from $50 to $100, is that
Correct.
correct? Is that the fee, who's paying that fee, just so I understand?
Well, that's a cremation permit fee, so that's paid, typically it's always paid by the funeral home, but
Okay.
that's charged to the families,
Okay.
usually as part of the funeral costs. And that's part of it. Hadn't been raised in over, I forget how many years. The
Okay.
problem is it doesn't, at $50, it doesn't hardly pay for the staffing to
Sure.
the time that they spend looking into that death and everything, so it helps offset those costs.
I just want to understand
Sure.
the mechanism of that fee. Thank
Sure.
you.
Other questions? I will say I concur with your directive to try and look for a full-time employee in the coroner's office to do autopsies. All right.
Thank you.
Dwayne, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, already on the move, is our sheriff, Dustin.
Good evening. Everybody in a good mood tonight? All right. Good evening, everyone. So there are, I think, a couple of modifications to the slides tonight for my sections from the general fund. Tammy, it's just for the law enforcement and then for corrections, correct? Okay. Thank you. I have several budgets that I manage as part of my role, and lucky for you and for me, the new position requests are in the first budget. So with our law enforcement budget, which is the 040 budget, we have an expected revenue of $1,342,436, and then a little over $7 million for expected expenditures. We have an increased budget this year, or increased. We're asking for an increase that's been worked into the budget, into these numbers that you see in front of you, for deputy training and increased investment in technology. We're still using Excel spreadsheets for scheduling and things like that, and quite honestly, it's going to be a lot easier if we use technology for some of those things. So we're in the process of exploring those. As with training, those of you know, since the Pretrial Fairness Act and the Safety Act and things, we've had a lot more mandates in the law enforcement side. And so this is just to help us with our overtime costs to make sure that we can provide a lot of that training. We have several high-quality instructors that work for us in the law enforcement division, and a lot of that is offered in-house. So that's why it doesn't cost a lot of training, but it costs a lot of overtime in order to provide those trainings. Increased salaries based on negotiated collective bargaining agreements. If you recall, 4 of our contracts were up this last year. And all of them have been all but one have been negotiated at this point and approved. And so the majority of our budget is always going to be salaries. And so a big increase has been our salaries that the county board approved during that process. As far as the requested positions, and so the big and probably the most important one that I foresee at this point is I have asked, and it has not been funded, it is not in your number that you have for this line yet, that's for you to decide, is an additional law enforcement sergeant position. And why that's important is in 2019, when we went to 12-hour shifts, our detective sergeant transitioned to the road. And so now we have 8 sergeants on the road. We've never replaced that position. We don't have a vacant position. We just moved that over. And so with our increased training requirements, with our increased internal investigation requirements, with everything that we have done, or all of our obligations as a result of the Safety Act, we really need somebody to oversee those things. In my opinion, it doesn't need to be the level of a lieutenant, but it can't be just a deputy who oversees those things. It has to be a supervisor. Additionally, and I kind of see this position as more of an administrative sergeant position, not necessarily out on the street. And the advantage to that is that we can, for an example, mental health court. So the county is talking seriously about forming a mental health court in the near future. That requires, for certification, that requires a dedicated deputy to be with the mental health court. I do not have staffing to be able to fulfill that obligation right now. We barely have staffing to fulfill the obligation for the drug court deputy. And so this is a position that could potentially help fulfill the role of drug court deputy, of mental health court deputy, because neither one of those would be a full-time role. So could help with those things, could help oversee our investigations, could help oversee our training requirements, our mandates, just kind of a catch-all for that position. And that's why I believe it's really important, because we really have a lot at stake if we don't meet those mandates, or God forbid something happens out on the street and it turns out that we should have had oversight where we don't. And so that is probably the most important position that I am asking for out of these 5 positions. I promised Tammy I'd be brief, so let me talk just briefly on the 4 additional deputy positions that I have asked for. And this isn't a new request. I've asked for these, I think, pretty much every year. As we have seen, I just want to provide a little bit of justification. As we have seen increased requirements for law enforcement officers, for an example, body cams. I believe by 2025, every law enforcement officer in the state of Illinois is required to wear a body cam. Well, that comes along with increased costs. Now, we in Champaign County have had them since 2015. But my point is as these small chiefs are retiring, for an example, Gifford or Fisher or some of those, we haven't solidified any plans, but they've started conversations with us about covering their towns whenever these chiefs retire. It is no longer financially feasible for them to employ their own police officers. And why that's important is because as the sheriff, and I hope this isn't broadcast out too widely because it's one of my best kept secrets, but as sheriff, we are the default response. So if Gifford does not have a police officer on, the sheriff's office is mandated to respond to that, and we have to deal with the situation accordingly. If we can get money reimbursed because we're providing those services to Gifford, for an example, then that is something I believe we should look into. We don't get reimbursement if, for an example, they don't have somebody on and we're called to a call for service up there. We only get reimbursement if they contract us for a certain amount of hours. We do that with Savoy, we do that with Ivesdale, we do that with Philo. And it doesn't have to be full-time. I can foresee that we will have enough contract obligations to be able to spread it out over an entire deputy. The village of Savoy has hinted at the fact that they would like to add a 4th deputy. And they pay pretty good for a deputy's reimbursement to the county. We do not have that personnel if we would decide to go that route. They reimburse us for full-time deputies. DCFS has also reached out. They have a pilot program in Sangamon County and a couple other counties to where they are reimbursing the salary and benefits for a full-time deputy to be stationed with their DCFS workers. In our case, would be here in Urbana at their office. If you recall, this came from the DCFS worker that was killed on the scene last year or the year before. And again, we don't have the staffing to be able to do some of those things. And again, Tammy and I and Michelle and I have talked about some more logistics. This is more of a high-level view of some of those things. There's a lot of details that would have to be worked out before I could promise you we would get reimbursement. But those are some potential avenues for reimbursement to the county in lieu of the additional deputies, the additional costs. Moving along, let's talk about our correctional budget. With our correctional budget, total revenue, $1,762,226, and a little over $11 million expenditure worked into the budget for fiscal year 24. If you recall, our Pretrial Fairness Act goes into effect on September the 18th, at which time our fees and fines will be significantly reduced. And so we never do break even on fines and fees versus what it costs my office to operate. However, we will see a reduction in fines and fees as it comes to the criminal justice system after September 18th. And so that's something to keep in mind. We have an increase. If you recall, last year or 2 years ago, I believe we had a new healthcare provider that came in. Along with that came increased pharmacy costs. Well, obviously, we have had an opportunity to evaluate those pharmacy costs, and you can see an increase in pharmacy costs worked into the budget for this next fiscal year. The thing that really gets us is if somebody comes in, we are required by law to continue their medication. So for an example, hepatitis or HIV. And those shots, Medicaid does not apply to inmates who are in custody. And so those who may be able to get those medications for free outside or for a nominal cost when they're not in custody, that stops whenever they come into custody. And so an HIV med, for an example, or a Hep C med, for an example, could cost us about $7,500, and that's per month. And we can't say no. Now, I will say that we have worked with public health. We had a good relationship with Promise Healthcare. They kind of changed administrators a while back. and when working through some of those things, to be able to provide some of those high-cost meds for free of charge from the county. And my jail superintendent, Captain Vogus, has done a good job at getting some of those high-cost medications down. However, that's one of the major reasons why our budget has increased for this coming year is anticipation of about $30,000 more in jail medical costs for pharmacy than what we have needed in the past. Increased budget for inmate food service due to contract negotiated in fiscal year 23. This is a contract that came to the county board. It was the best opportunity for us to pursue, and with that came an increase in food costs. Now, we do not know what our inmate population is going to do after September 18th. We do not expect that it's going to have a major decrease in inmate population. So that's going to be something we're going to be watching, but that is something to where, unlike inmate health care where we pay monthly, we pay per meal for our food contract. And so if we have fewer inmates in there that need fewer meals, then we're going to be paying less to that vendor than we would be otherwise. Same thing goes the other way. If we have more inmates in there, we're going to be paying more to the vendor for food. Increased salaries based on a negotiated collective bargaining agreement, which was approved by the county board earlier this year. And then I already mentioned the decrease in court fines and fees. This should be our last year of housing as many inmates out of county as we currently are. So we should see a significant increase in that in fiscal year 25. Our last general fund budget is the Emergency Management Agency. EMA in Champaign County falls under me. Revenues come from Homeland Security. Was I out of order? Oh, Merrick, okay. Revenues come from Homeland Security and Department of Transportation Hazardous Materials Training. The budget includes appropriation for expected expenditures, $65,000 revenue total, which is from grants, and expected expenditure of $185,085. That's pretty much right on key with what we have paid in the past. A little bit more for salaries. Merit Commission. Merit Commission is essentially our hiring board, for a lack of a better term. This budget is used for recruitment and testing of employees covered under the Merit Commission. It is difficult to predict employee needs for the future. All employees that work for me fall under the Merit Commission, all sworn employees, except for the Chief Deputy. And so they're represented by the collective bargaining agreement, and they're also represented by the Merit Commission. It's difficult to predict how many employees we're going to need. If you would have asked me 3 months ago, I would say it right now, we'd be down 10 deputies. We were lucky with some laterals that have came up, and now we're just down 3. And so it's really difficult to anticipate what those are going to be. But Merit Commission pays for psychological tests and medical tests and testing and things like that. Good. Okay. Moving along to our special funds. So I have special funds, and what I mean by that is they are limited in scope. Their income comes from certain places, and we have legal restrictions on what we can spend those funds on as well. Drug forfeitures is one. It's difficult to predict the number of cases that'll be handed. We're pursuing asset forfeitures as appropriate, and we work closely with the state's attorney's office on that. Revenue total, we're expecting for 2024 about $12,000. Expenditure total about $14,000. We have $105,359 fund balance. Revenues and expenditures are all regulated by statute, and we work closely with the Illinois State Police on those forfeitures as well. Cannabis Regulation Fund, I believe, is your next one. So a point of clarification, if I remember correctly from last year, the Cannabis Fund is given to us by the state from taxes collected from the legal sale of cannabis in order to help combat the illegal sale of cannabis. And so this isn't necessarily things that we get from drug busts or anything like that. This is provided to us from the state, 8%, I believe, and then we have certain things we can spend that money on. We can spend that on education. We can spend that on equipment. We can spend that on anything that can be seen as combating the illegal cannabis trade. And so we are expecting about $50,500 in revenue and expending about $48,000 in revenue. Our fund balance we're expecting at $145,910. Jail commissary is our next one. The revenues and expenditures are regulated by statute again. Basically what happens is for certain things, and we're really good in Champaign County about not charging excess fees. A lot of sheriffs will actually charge a lot of commission on things and then get that money in exchange. We don't. So we don't make money on jail phone calls, for an example. We don't sell tobacco or vapes, even if it was legal now. A lot of sheriffs will sell those things inside, and then they will collect the money from those. We don't do that in Champaign County. We're really good about that. But jail commissary, anything we might collect money on under this fund has to go back for inmate welfare. And so we are limited on what we can use that for. We can't simply take that money. I think a good example is probably commissary. So inmates order a candy bar, a certain amount of money will come back to Champaign County, but that has to be used for inmate welfare. That can't just be put into the general fund. And so that's a good example of our inmate commissary fund and what those funds can be used for. Revenue, we're expecting about $115,000. Expenditures, about $78,175. And our fund balance is $728,962. Lastly, I believe is jail medical cost. You can think of this as a pass-through fund to help with our jail medical costs. Revenue is collected from court fines. Expenditures are related by statute. We are expecting the revenue of $10,010 with the expenditure as the same. It's a pass-through fund. Our fund balance is about we're expecting at $3,248 in fiscal year 24. I wasn't quite as concise as Dwayne, but I am happy to answer any questions you might have about any of these budgets.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. My goodness. Mine is really simple. Why is this fund balance so huge in the commissary? What are you saving it for, Dustin? What's going on?
Well, a lot of the things we do inmate-wise are with volunteers. And so we don't cost any money, we don't charge any money for that. When we do have things, though, for an example, we're required now by law to offer a women's health class for pregnant females. And so we've contracted with Champaign County Healthcare Consumers to provide that training for us. And so that would be paid for out of the jail commissary fund. I would say that when we do need something, they can be larger purchases. So for an example, if we needed we've been talking about a refuge area for the jail for several years, but now we have the consolidation project that's built into that. That was going to cost us about $250,000. And so when we have things like that, that money can really be useful. But just because we have a lot of volunteers and things, we're not spending a whole heck of a lot of money out of that inmate welfare fund. Yep.
Samantha.
Thank you. Any updates about the jail phone calls?
As far as
What's your opinion as far as the 2 free phone calls for the inmates daily?
Oh,
Going
so
with the different provider, like, could you give us any kind of updates or
Sure.
how are you feeling about that?
Sure. So I will
Thank
say that
you.
this morning we issued an addendum to the RFP requesting that vendors who provide a response to the RFP, which is due on October 9th, I believe it's the first week of October, to also provide us a cost of the county, because nothing's free, and so a cost of the county on what it would cost us to provide 2 20-minute phone calls a day to each inmate in our custody. So we will have a better idea. The goal will be to come back to the county board then to make the decision on the investment we want to make. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Jenny, go ahead.
So I guess kind of following along with that, would phone calls fall under welfare costs that commissary fund balance could be used for?
I would need to consult with the state's attorney's office on that, but it's definitely something we could look at. I will say that my preliminary calculations, based on what I expect the population to be, would cost about $500,000 a year
Okay.
to the county.
Just curious.
So again, very, 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 very preliminary, but it's absolutely something we can go, we can explore to see how we can do that.
Okay.
Ellie?
Can you explain a little bit more? Is there a relationship between the jail medical costs, the pass-through, and then the fees that you're having to pay, the high cost for medication? Are those related at all, or?
So Tammy can probably explain, that's, the Joe medical fee is one of those things that is there, but I don't really have any much knowledge of it.
It is a specific fee that's required to be collected, and it has to be receipted into a special revenue fund. We just transfer it to the general fund in order to contribute to the much greater, medical contract.
Mr. Farney?
Sheriff, you mentioned that your revenues have taken a hit from legislation that's been passed in the last year. Have you or your association been working with the state legislature to try and recoup some of those unfunded mandates that are now being passed on to us?
We are, and the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board has actually started putting out grants for, to help recoup some of those training costs and things like that. Unfortunately, Let's is a mess right now. And I believe that I got an email one evening, it was for an unrelated grant, but I got an email one evening at like 5:15 on a Friday of a weekend, or of a holiday weekend, that said, please have this return signed in 15 minutes in order to get this money. And so it's very disorganized. I do believe they are working on the officer end, the deputy end, trying to reimburse some of that. Body cameras is a good example. But as far as recouping some of the fines and fees, we're always working with the Illinois Sheriff's Association to make sure our legislators know the impact of legislation, and so they can make informed decisions on how to move forward. Every county in the state is going to be affected by fewer fees, though. So, yep.
Diane?
I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to ask a question about your general fund. And basically, it looks to me like a biggest jump is in your SLEP for your personal expenditures. It's quite a big jump, actually, compared to the year before. I didn't know if there was something that motivated that to be such a large jump. And also, I kind of thought the SLEP was kind of waning down, actually, with the number of staff that we had left on that program.
So are you, Diane, are you talking about corrections budget or law enforcement?
Well, I'm looking at Sheriff General Fund, 50020 and 203, and then also in the Correctional Center, page 10, and then page, yikes. Let's see, and then page 16 on the other. Basically, it just seemed like a large jump compared to the years in the past. It's like an $84,000 jump compared to a smaller amount that was there before.
So my page numbers are different than yours. I will speak generally, and then Tammy can fill in the gaps if, or Michelle, if they see somewhere where I'm missing. Deputies, so sworn deputies are always going to be SLEP, at least for the foreseeable future. They've changed tiers, tier 1, tier 2, but a deputy for us, by law, I believe, is in SLEP. Corrections has been transitioning out of SLEP. I believe we have a handful of officers who are still in SLEP, but as they retire and new officers are hired, they're not in SLEP anymore. They're in IMRF, which is significantly less for the county. As far as generally the increase is, both budgets had 7% increase for salaries, starting this year and then working forward, and that's where you're really seeing that significant increase. Yep.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
And my question has to do with the corrections, I think, yes, Correctional Center. In my book, it's on page 17, and it's items 501, 005, and 006. Looks like there's some big changes between the 2022 and the 2023. And one is food, non-travel, and the other is medical supplies.
So, so the best way to explain that, food non-travel is that food contract that has increased. It was a contractual cost.
Boy, it sure has.
Well, however, this is kind of deceiving. And the reason why is because last year, as you recall, we have a newer software program for our budgeting and our financials called Munis. And so we have changed things around in line items. And so where you might find, last year where we would have taken this out of something, now we take it out of a different line item. And so you will probably see a significant, albeit not as significant, decrease, but you will also see a significant decrease in another line item that we moved this from. Does that make sense?
I haven't found the decrease yet, but I'll take your word.
What's that? So that's one of the reasons. Quite honestly, it's been pretty messy trying to figure out what goes where, and it seems like it changes every week, at least from our perspective, and which makes budgeting process, and it's nothing against Tammy, it makes our budgeting process very, very, very difficult.
It was previously outside services, 502002. If you look under 2023 original,
Oh. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I have several questions or comments. So first, kind of going back to the question about the fund balance for commissary and like inmate welfare, it occurs to me that as we're completing this expansion, that this might be a good time to revisit that and to think creatively and sort of critically about what, as we're moving into this new space, how maybe we could use some of those funds to improve the conditions, right? And so maybe having a conversation with facilities, frankly, having a conversations with the people that are incarcerated currently and the staff that work with them about what could we do in the new space that we're having to spend down. That fund balance is just, frankly, I understand like we keep it for special projects, but I think we as a county can maybe use this opportunity as we're moving into this new space to think about how could we spend some of that effectively. Because I definitely don't think that we should continuously see revenue and increase of expenditures in that particular category, right? Especially when it's something that could be used to make people's lives more livable. So I think, I just would like to say, like, I think that this might be a good chance going into 2025 to think about, as we're moving into that new facility, maybe what we could do with some of that money. And I know that some of this is, in part, some of the partnerships and things have dwindled, because of COVID, and then because we're housing so many people out. So really, like, we have a partnership for people that aren't here, right? So I do understand the reasoning why it would have grown over this time. But I think, especially not for 2024, but going into 2025, let's have a conversation about like what we could do with that funding. And then the questions I have, specifically around the personnel requests. So, as you know, your folks are expensive, especially outfitting them. So your personnel requests are just over $913,000 in one-time costs, and then forever recurring costs $500,000, right? I appreciate you prioritizing that for us, but even the sheriff, just to outfit the sergeant, would be just under $250,000. And then recurring costs of $153,000, and trying to figure out how we get to that number is a challenge. So I think getting more concrete about the potential for outside revenues from those cities that are like, moving out of law enforcement or might be interested in contracting with us, and ensuring that those contracts include not just salary but benefits, I think would help us arrive at a yes for the deputies. right? Especially the two that I think you mentioned that potentially, if we could bring in revenue that would cover their costs or significantly cover their costs, that makes it a lot easier for us to say yes, right? And I want to make sure that everybody knows you have this. There is in your packet, this budget doesn't have any of the additional personnel costs in it. And so this not only includes the requests, it includes the cost of benefits, the cost of training, or equipment, which I think it only applies to your folks, unfortunately. And then also gives a little bit of history for those who are new on the board, right? So we have, 2 years ago, we did approve 2 new deputies. But the other thing is, in trying to think about how can we get you to yes on these I mean, I'll just be blunt, like, we don't have $1 million, like, laying around, right? So how do we get you to yes? One question I do have is, in terms of your correctional staff and thinking about it, like how your budgets fit together, one question I would have is, are we going to continue to need 50 correctional staff, given that, and as far as I know, your correctional lines haven't changed since we've operated two jails. And I get that there's more requirements that have been put on because of different legislation, and I want to make sure that we obviously fulfill all of those legal requirements. But are we still going to need 50 correctional staff? And I know we've been understaffed in those categories for a long time, but imagine that we live in a fictional world where we're fully staffed. Are we still going to need 50 correctional officers with this new footprint that we have? Once we're not driving people back and forth and all of the, stuff we have going on right now. And if not, if we could do that analysis, and I know that it's not apples to apples in terms of salary, but is there any way that we could think about, can we resize our correctional staff in order to pay for some of these street deputies, or is that impossible? And do you know what I'm saying? Like, can we put these two budgets into conversation with one another?
You want a response?
Oh, yeah, and then the other thing that I'd like to put into conversation on this is right now we're estimating $3 million for out-of-county, right? And that's obviously a tremendous hit. However, when we bring those people back, there's going to be increased costs that incur for bringing them back. We're going to see an increase on our food services, on our right? And so I think one thing that would help this analysis is if we give you 2 new deputies this year, or we give you a sergeant this year, right? Looking forward to 2025, what is that difference between out-of-county and the cost that we'd be incurring? And if the difference is, oh, well, it's going to save us $500,000, that also is easier for us to get you to yes for a sergeant, because we're going to see those savings, right, over time, and would be able to work that in. So I think, especially for your shop, for your staff, having a clearer understanding of what are the potential revenue, and, maybe not commitments, but clear understanding of what are the potential outside revenue sources that we could get. How do the correction budget and the street side sergeant budget work together in concert with one another, given this new landscape of the jail? And then where do we estimate that our in-county, right, costs will be as compared to our out-of-county, and are there cost savings there? And if we knew what those 3 things were, I still don't know that we're going to get you to $1 million, but we might be able to get you to yes on that sergeant, or to get to you to, you know what I'm saying? And so I think we as a board, we're going to need to work with your office and the admin office to get that analysis in order to make an informed opinion. Because where we could carry, I'll just be honest, like we could carry $250,000 to get you a sergeant this year from our fund balance, and it wouldn't destroy us. Could we carry $150,000 a year forever without a yes answer to some of those questions that I just asked? No. Right? That's not sustainable. And so I think that sort of analysis is what I would need as finance chair to understand how best to advocate for your positions. Now you can respond.
Whew, that was a lot to unpack. I will say that my role as sheriff is to tell you what I need, and your role as a board is to figure out of everybody who's telling you what they need, how you make it happen, And so I need 4 more deputies, and I need an administrative sergeant. Do I expect to get all of those approved? No, I don't. But how are you going to know I need them if I don't tell you, right? I will also say, based on what we believe is going to happen now after September 18th, we will need all 50 correctional officer positions, because those who will be incarcerated will have their detention hearing, and they will be deemed a public safety risk, or you know what I mean. And so, yes, we're going to need those extra officers for officer safety and inmate safety. And so we are expecting, a year from now, we may be in a different place. We'll have time to assess all of these things. But I am expecting we will need all 50 positions. And we're working really hard to try to get those last 10 positions filled, correctional officer wise. I will say that I am 95% confident that if you guys gave me 2 new deputy positions tomorrow, well, I'm being overly optimistic, but after consultation with the state's attorney's office, they drop the paperwork, DCFS would sign a 2-year contract, and the Village of Savoy would take on an extra deputy. They have told me they are waiting for my recommendations to add that 4th deputy, and the ball's in my court. Now, staffing-wise, we would need to hire and things like that, right? But those are the 2 positions that I feel 95% confident we could get compensated for at least the salary and benefits. Savoy would compensate us for equipment and things like that as well. The other ones, the chief hasn't retired in Gifford yet, right? And so I can't tell you, yes, we're going to get that, or even how much it would be at this point. But obviously, this is the budgeting process. You all don't like to add positions in the middle of the year. And so that's why I'm kind of bringing it forth now, just to make sure that you realize that there are opportunities to get some of those costs recouped. So hopefully that puts it in the back of your mind that there are some ways to get those things.
Go ahead, Diane.
Real quick along that lines, I want to be very careful when we're budgeting things. These communities that we're talking about don't have the funds that some of these other communities may have, so they probably will not be able to completely support, but maybe there's a few of them together that would be able to support one. So that would be important. But the other thing is this, I don't think we need to also lose sight of, I believe there probably always will be a small amount that we will need to house outside of the county just for their own safety. So that will never go away in my mind. Not that it'll be this great of a number, but I don't think that number will ever completely go away.
Anyone else? Okay, Dustin, you going on to emergency management now?
Yeah. Sorry, mine were a
okay.
little out of order.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Next up, Circuit Court and Judge Rosenbaum.
For short people. Good evening, everybody. My name is Randy Rosenbaum, and I'm the presiding judge here in Champaign County. The last 2 guys were asking you for more money, and they got up to here with the guns. I'm sorry I don't have a gun with me, but I do have a pen and glasses. We have 5 different funds. The one that I really want to spend the most time on is the first one, which is the main general fund. It's the largest fund. We're expecting expenditure totals going up next year. There are 3 things I want to address about this fund. The first is that the largest increase for us is in what's called professional services. These are mandated services that we cannot avoid, and every single year they go up, not just because we're having more people who need these mandated services, but because the costs of them are going up. I'm talking about psychiatric evaluations. I'm talking about interpreters for court. I'm talking about preparation of transcripts for indigent people. I'm talking about attorneys who can't handle the cases, sometimes in civil, but usually in public defender conflict cases. So our largest change in this budget really is that increase in that professional services, and we've spoken with the authorities here, and they've kind of plugged in an increase for that reason. The second thing I wanted to address about this particular fund is really just to put something on your radar. A little bit ago, we have 12 court clerks. These are the folks who work in the courtrooms with the judges. We have 11 plus a backup, sort of a swing clerk who covers for when somebody's sick or on vacation. Informally, we've been talking in the recent past about some disparity in some of the salaries of some of the lower end clerks, the ones who have been hired more recently. We met with the union officially on Friday, so this is not in our budget. And again, I'm just sort of giving you the heads up. I'm not going to say that they're wrong, but every hire was independent of all the other hires. They happen over the course of time. Every situation is different. We met with them, and it very well may be that I'm going to come to you in the very near future for a budget amendment to give several of them some small increases to make sure that they are all, it's not disparate treatment among people who have been in service with us for about the same period of time. If we bring that to you with fringes and with, for those individuals, for the remaining balance of the year, it would probably be about $6,300. It's overall about $8 an hour total spread out among a number of them. Not all the clerks. This is not like a way to get all their money up. It's to correct some disparities. Obviously, if you approve that with the budget amendment, it would affect this budget as well. That's the second thing. The third thing is the big issue I want to talk about. I know that there are a number of other departments who are asking for more staff, and I'm not trying to minimize their requests. I think they're all valid requests. What we're asking for is an administrative legal secretary. This is not a new position. This is a position that we had up until 2010. And because of financial problems with the county, we lost that position. It's still there. It's just been unfunded. And since that time, we have struggled to get a lot of things done that we need to get done. And in the last several years, there have been a number of initiatives, a number of new laws, and a lot more work on the administration of the court system. And we really, truly need to have this position funded again. Of all the positions that are being funded or being requested by you, this is one that already exists. It's just not funded, and it is one of the lower end in terms of the dollar amounts. I'm hoping that's a selling point to you. The other selling point is that even though we're asking, I think the salary was put in there at $35,000, we do have a law library fund with a balance, and so it's possible that we could put some of that money towards the cost so it wouldn't be the full $35,000. Just very quickly, let me give you sort of a synopsis of how this has played out. In 2009, we had 3 part-time jury clerks. We also had a part-time law librarian. We no longer have any of those positions. We have one person who does the jury coordination, and that's it. We don't have a law librarian. She has no assistants. We also, back then, did not have an expanded drug court where we have new grants. We also didn't have a mortgage foreclosure mediation program. We also didn't have the Safety Act, which requires more docket entries and forms to be created. We also didn't have the grand jury. We also are having many, many more jury trials, and right now with one jury coordinator, we can't start 2 trials at the same time, which really delays justice for many people. We also are having a huge increase in the number of people who are going to the help desk, the self-help desk, and coordination there is essential. They can't hear me. I'm trying to be loud. Oh, okay. Right. So let me start over. No, I'm not going to start over. I'm sorry if those of you could not hear me. We also have the Supreme Court of Illinois who has adopted time standards for making cases be resolved in a certain time frame, which I'm not sure if we're meeting or not because we don't have staff to help clarify whether or not we're meeting those requirements. We also have, as I said earlier, more and more interpreters. They have to be scheduled and very difficult ones to find as well. We also have weddings every day at lunchtime. That is to allow people to come and get married over the lunch hours. And our clerks have to check them in at 11:30 every day. And if the clerk is in court, we're struggling every single day to find somebody to do this. So the bottom line is we need somebody to help do all the wedding sign-ins. We need somebody to help our jury commissioner so that we can start 2 trials at the same time. We need somebody who can help with all of these other obligations that didn't exist back in 2010 when we lost the position. So all I can do is just tell you that we have asked for this position a number of times over the years, and either you don't have the money or other departments were more worthy of it, and I respect it and everything, but we're really at our wits' end, and access to justice is a very important thing. Timely trials is an important thing. Resolving cases in a timely manner is essential as well. So all I can do is just beg you to fund this position that used to be funded up until 2010. So that's the fundamentals of our main budget there. Our next slide is jury commission. Really not a whole lot to say on this one, other than we budgeted in there based on the $10 a day to pay the jurors and the grand jurors. A few months back, you asked us for a memo on how much it would cost to change things. So obviously, if you wanted to change the amount, and I'm not pushing one way or the other, but what's budgeted right now is simply the $10 a day that we have right now. Other than that, it's not too much of an increase. The next budget here is the law library. Again, not too much change in that. It is to also offset the costs of operating the legal self-help center. We have a part-time person who helps out. We have Justice Court people who help as well. As I said earlier, the number of people who are coming to the self-help desk is increasing every single year, and we're helping more and more people. So that is the law library fund, and you can see it has a fairly significant balance. And in general, the expenditures tend to be a little bit less than the revenue, and so this may be an opportunity for us to find some revenue source for that extra clerk that we so desperately need. The next fund has to do with specialty courts or drug courts. No real significant change there, other than the fact that this last year, the Supreme Court certified us again. Every 3 years you go through that process. It was very timely and exhausting. We got it recertified for another 3 years. We did obtain a Redeploy Illinois grant for $400,000 a year. We're still working through the logistic details because we've never really gotten a grant like this in the past, and we are jumping through all the right hoops to make sure we start getting the money. We hope we start to get that very, very soon. Mental health court, as I tell jurors every time when I have a jury trial, that sometimes I say, let's take a 5-minute break, ends up being 30 minutes. I tell them we have to take care of things outside their control. It's usually not my fault, but if you're the type of person who has to blame somebody, go ahead and blame me. The mental health court, I've just been overwhelmed with the drug court recertification, with the number of trials we're doing, the whole Safety Act, which is just shaking everybody's world in terms of all the changes. I was talking to Julia Reitz, our state's attorney. I've talked to Liz Pollock, the public defender. We just have to sit down and start talking about it and making it happen. So that's where we're at with that. And there are a lot of players who are very interested in helping, the Mental Health Board, NAMI, and others. And then our last slide in our last fund has to do with foreclosure mediation. This has kind of been a bane of our existence for a while. We've had some difficulty in the last year of getting an accurate amount of our revenue. There was a change where it was $75 for each filing, then it went to $100. At one point, we had $150 or $200 or $250 in our fund, and with that one, that's not enough money. We should have about $5,000 in there. Plus, it doesn't equal the $100 each. We've been working with the clerk. We've been working with the administration to figure out how much money it is. But so these numbers, to some extent, are guesswork. But this is a nonprofit organization, Dispute Resolution Institute, that helps us with the free mediation. So there are not really that many expenses with it. So those are really the funds that we have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Go ahead, Kyle.
Have you been able to look into what kind of costs we'd be looking at if we were to adopt a mental health court?
Hopefully it won't be too much, because in theory, it would start off small and hopefully grow larger, but I would have to talk with the state's attorney and public defender, but I would hope that we could just integrate it and do it right before drug court or after, so we would use the same attorneys, we would use the same mental health providers and other people there, the substance abuse folks. I know the sheriff would like to have another deputy help with mental health court, which may be appropriate as well. Part of our redeploy grant for drug court was also a specialty grant. So, and we plugged in some money for another coordinator to help with mental health court. I know that the mental health board is anxious to help with us, and so I'm guessing there would be not a whole lot that the county would have to pony up to start a mental health court. I just don't know yet until we know the details.
And do we, because I know that we had discussed getting some sort of like different models or estimates for the costs of increasing jury pay. It looks like you guys just budgeted for the normal $10. I mean, is that something that we're gonna have a chance to look at before the budget? I don't know who was working on that.
Well,
What's that?
all I know is that the memo we sent to you, again, we're not saying what you should do. It's really a legislative issue for you, but we did provide a memo, and I was told that it's part of your packet somewhere, where we kind of itemize based on the numbers of trials we're having, the number of juror days, what it would cost if you did $15 a day or $20 a day, or had some staggered things. So it's really up to you, but you do have that information. But our budget would have to be modified because what we did submit is just the $10 a day.
Chris?
Oh, thank you. I too had a question about mental health court, and you answered Kyle's question, and I encourage you to continue. Thank you for doing that.
It's essential. I think everybody in the community thinks we need to have it, and we just have to figure out how to set it up and get it up and running. So,
Stephanie?
A couple of things. One, I just want to, we have several new board members, so this is the first time they've ever done this. Us as a body, like one of the main things we have to do is decide if we want to switch any of these unfunded things to funded, and then how we're going to do that. So just to give you a landscape of where we are, my understanding is the overall budget's about $500,000 out of whack. Which isn't the end of the world. We have a healthy general fund that's primarily being driven by the out-of-county expenses, and then in addition, things like we're going to have a lot of moving expenses next year going into County Plaza. So like that, the $500,000 one-time 2024 situation isn't keeping me up at night. Where we get into what could keep me up at night is some of the recurring costs, right? And so just to give you a landscape of the unfunded sort of positions, this is not to advocate or not advocate for your position, is total is, including outfitting the sheriff's deputies, it would be if we said yes to everybody, it would be just under $2 million for 2024. So obviously that's not a thing. We don't have that. And then, and that isn't even including if we added this, and we might end up having to add in this admin assistant for veteran affairs, that would put us over $2 million, right? And so, and that's not on this chart because, it wasn't part of any process. So that, I think, kind of keeping that in mind, one of the things we're gonna have to do is figure out how do we get to, if we wanna figure out how do we get to yes on these things, especially on personnel, understanding that that's a perpetual cost. And I do appreciate the idea that the law library fund balance, it could pay for some of it, but I mean, if we paid for the full bore out of it, within 4 years, you wouldn't have a fund balance anymore, right? So we would have to kind of think about really how much weight could that carry long-term. Although I do appreciate you trying to get back up somebody that you lost in 2010, and I do recognize that you have a lot of new unfunded mandates in the court system that you're going to have to deal with. So that's one thing that we need to decide. The other thing that we need to decide is this question of jury pool, right? So we've gotten this memo, we've discussed it at length as a body. This month is when we need to decide, right? Between now and sort of when we have that meeting in December, that special finance meeting in September, I kept saying December, I meant September. So if we're going to decide that we want to increase the jury pool, not theoretically, what of these 47 options do we want to do, right? And we need to put that into conversation with these other questions. So this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So that wasn't maybe so much directed at you, but I just wanted to make sure everybody was understanding where we were in terms of the process. And then this is also not directed at you, but but it's something that you brought up, the compression issue, and I appreciate you being proactive. The compression is when you have people coming in that are new employees that come in at a higher rate than long-term employees. That's not okay. It's not okay for morale. It's just not okay. However, I do think we have to be careful of just addressing it in one area of county operations. We have compression issues across the board. And especially if we're going to open up the AFSCME contract for an MOU, I think it's something we need to address, for sure. I don't think we should do it piecemeal, like we shouldn't do the courts and then the circuit clerk's office is going to be like, hey, we heard, you know what I mean? Like, I would rather we get the full bore of the cost from the admin department, so we fully understand what that would cost. And I think it's something we need to address, and I appreciate you being proactive, but again, the courts are not the only space where this is. So I would rather we just look at all those figures once, because I do think if we give it to your folks, I mean, understandably so, the long-term employees that are making less than the new employees in other divisions are going to come knocking on our door, and they're going to want the same thing. And it's going to be real hard to say no, because like, how can we say no to them when we said yes to your folks? That's not at all me saying I don't think we should say yes, but I'd rather we have a comprehensive picture of it than doing it piece by piece. So that was more directed at you, Steve. I don't really have any questions for you. Your stuff was, you answered all my questions.
Okay. Any other questions?
Go ahead, Jenny.
I think I'm just trying to understand all of the law library funds / fund balance services. It looks like I'm trying to find back where it said there was a large increase in the amount of usage of law library services. Do you think that would also maybe decrease some of that overage that goes into the fund balance every year? Are we gonna, or do you think we'll consistently keep going up about 10,000, which is what it looks like year over year, that maybe could go towards that assistant position?
I think part of the reason that we've been saving money is because we've been using this part-time attorney, a retired attorney, to help. He doesn't cost much money. And we've also been using Justice Corps employees who are free of charge. There was a time years ago when we didn't have Justice Corps and other things, and we would have to be paying a lot more money. That's why it's built up.
So even with the increase in usage, you don't think there would be an increase in cost coming anytime soon?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Other questions? Thought I saw a hand. I guess I was wrong. Thank you very much. Next up is Juvenile Detention Center and Shannon Siders.
Hi. Does that work? Okay, there we go. I think that works. Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Shannon Siders. I am the Director of Probation and Court Services. I just started in this position in January, so this is all new to me too. I was an adult probation officer 9 months ago, so this is a very big change doing this kind of work here. So starting with the Juvenile Detention Center, our salaries are eligible for full reimbursement from the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts, so that's AOIC. So they provide reimbursement for our salaries. So that's our first highlight there. For the budget for the detention center, our main two increases were from an increase in the medical services and an increase in the food contract. So as Sheriff Harmon had mentioned, both of those, we kind of just piggyback onto their contracts. And the juvenile detention center food increase was pretty significant. It was a 61% change when we went from Aramark to Trinity. We think that the food quality is better, at least. So it was a pretty considerable increase in the food contract. And then we anticipate another increase that will happen next May, and then an increase with the medical contract as well. As far as staffing goes at the detention center, because I know you're going to ask, so I'll try to address that right off. We currently have, depending on how you want to look at it, 5 vacancies. We have an additional 2 officers scheduled to start on September 11th. We've actually had 4 officers start in the month of August. One worked one day and decided he did not want to work with juveniles. So that was a little disheartening. It seems like we make a little progress and then we're kind of going backwards a little bit. So we are looking forward to having 2 people starting on September 11th, and we have 1 open supervisor position that we're hoping to fill in the next couple weeks, and then that would probably lead to another open officer position. So that's why it's kind of hard to give you an exact number of vacancies, but we have less vacancies than when I was here back in May. Also, just so you know, we are not housing any kids out of county currently. All of our kids are in custody in Champaign County. So we did that until about June when we were able to get some people hired and trained and going a little bit better. And all of our kids have been in custody here since about mid-June. So we are trying to move forward in a positive direction. Like I said, our main increases were from the contractual increases because of the food and medical. For probation, our costs for that, pretty much all, probation, there are not a lot of costs for probation for the general corporate budget. It's pretty much salaries. And again, those are also eligible for full funding reimbursement from AOIC. However, I will note that there are 14 officer positions that it's not actually full funding. They're called salary subsidy positions. So we have 14 salary subsidy positions, which are actually only eligible for a $1,000 a month reimbursement as opposed to the full amount. So the rest of our probation budget is pretty much just the staffing and then the probation services fund. Yes, there is a large balance in there, and I'll just go ahead and address that right away. That fund does have a large balance. Part of the issue is we have to have approval from the chief judge for spending funds from that budget. We also have to use AOIC's guidelines. And AOIC has a lot of guidelines about what that money can be spent for. So they are telling us they don't want us to buy vehicles out of that budget currently, and they only want us to use that money for client services. So anything else, they don't want us to be using that money for. We also can't use that money in the probation services fund for the juvenile detention center because the kids at the juvenile detention center are not paying probation services fees. So they don't want us to use the money in the probation services fund for the juvenile detention center. So what we do use that money for, we use it to pay for all of our drug testing. It pays for all of our groups that we have come into the probation office, like MRT, drug court groups, Seeking Safety, Healthy Choices. It pays for all of those groups. It pays for the books for all of those groups. MRT books are incredibly expensive if you are not aware. So it pays for those kinds of expenses. It also pays for sex offender evaluations. It pays for partner abuse classes. When we have clients who are unable to pay for the groups themselves, we use that probation services fund to pay for those kind of groups. It helps with community service projects that we work on. So that's what we are using that fund for currently. And if AOIC was ever to say we can't fully fund your salaries, we also would use that money to pay for the remaining salaries. So we don't want to necessarily spend it all in case next year AOIC says, okay, we don't have enough money for you, you're gonna have to come up with this money, and we can use that money for the rest of the salaries. We do have concerns about the Safety Act, like many other people have stated here tonight. This is likely going to decrease for the future when we are not getting as much money in probation services fees. I don't know how much. That'll be something we'll have to kind of be keeping an eye on in the future. So, questions?
Anyone? Go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you. So I see here the department has 46 grant and aid positions, including the problem-solving coordinator. I think that would be something very beneficial to our youth while they're over at the detention center. Can you just talk more about that? Like, is that something that's being strongly advocated for? Because I just really think that this would definitely need to be filled, the position.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're looking at.
I'm sorry, the bottom of page 49. It said the funding, the full funding as reimbursement for salaries of all grant and aid positions. Do we currently have a problem-solving court coordinator?
That's our drug court coordinator that Judge Rosenbaum mentioned. So the problem-solving court coordinator is the drug court. He's for.
Oh, the same judge, you're saying?
He technically works for the, he works for the judge, but they get reimbursement back for his salary.
Okay.
So the problem-solving court coordinator is our drug court coordinator.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Thank you. I miss.
Anyone? Tammy?
I just want to point out on page 48 at the bottom of the page, when Shannon was talking about the probation services fund being able to support the general fund if AOIC cuts funding, in fact, that probation services fund did transfer $500,000 between 2 years to the general fund when AOIC cut funding. So that has happened in the pretty near term.
Thanks, Tammy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is our public defender, Liz Pollock.
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to briefly, before I start, say a huge thank you to Tammy and Michelle, because I asked them a bunch of really stupid questions during this process since this is my first time, and they were always prompt with answering, and I appreciate everything you guys did, so thank you. Just a brief update on performance of the office. You all know I've been here since December. We had 9 attorneys when I started. We're up to 13. I have been working on recruitment efforts. The fact is that nobody is responding to our job postings, so we're going to have to be creative. To be creative, I have signed up for on-campus interviewing at pretty much every major law school in this state and the surrounding 4 states, and I already have over 17 applications for positions starting after this next round of graduates will be finished in June of 24. So I hope that whatever staffing shortage we currently have will be remedied in the near future, but we have to make it through to next year to do that. We have completely modernized the office. We now have electronic filing. We have Adobe Acrobat Pro. We have new laptops, all thanks to ARPA and the granting of the request that I've made to this body in the last 8 months. So thank you for that. I feel like we're doing very, very well right now on moving cases. We are closing more than we are opening. And in general, I just feel like we've really picked it up at the PD's office. So thank you for the support. There is one major thing that I am requesting here, which is a new social worker position, also called mitigation specialist. It is a new position. It is not something we've previously had in the office, but I think it is absolutely essential. If you look at anything in my budget that I'm asking for, that's what I want. A mitigation specialist is someone with a social work background who focuses on developing social histories, background information on our client bases, helps with client management, mental health needs while we have incarcerated people. They also connect clients with drug rehabilitation, mental health services, and other areas in the community that might help benefit them long term. They reduce recidivism in general by providing those resources. I have never worked without a mitigation specialist, and I find myself spending a lot of time dealing with these issues, which I'm not trained for. I have some experience from having done this for a long time, but having a social worker in the office is something that I think is absolutely essential. Imagine you have one client who has an entire family of people who want to know what's going on with their case, and you spend time every day talking to 4 or 5 different family members. Then you have to spend time filling out medical releases, sending them out, following up with Carl and Rosecrans and everybody else on the planet to try to get those records when they don't come in on time. A client is having a crisis in the jail. They call me and I'm in court and I can't go over and help. All of these things are things that a mitigation specialist would handle. We have had interns from the School of Social Work who I have been training to do some of this work, but it's only 1 semester. and they are very young. So they're trying their best, and even their kind of novice efforts have really improved the level of service that we're able to provide. So that's my number one priority for the fiscal year 24 process. I have also asked for a paralegal. I recognize that not everybody's going to get what they ask for, but I think having a paralegal would help defray some of the motion drafting, motion filing, and electronic management that we have in the office. I will point out the state's attorney's office has 3 victim witness advocates who are their social workers or their version of social workers, and a couple of paralegals. We have 0 and 0. I think evening that out would be beneficial for everybody and also allow our office to provide a higher level of service. The remaining budget requests are simply increases in cost. We have, as the circuit court had, more expenditures for interpretation, more expenditures for transcripts. We can't help that those costs have gone up, so they're in there because of that. The other thing that is in the budget request is to continue the post-conviction contract that we generated this year. That was funded out of my unused personnel via budget transfer. My request is that it's going to go into professional services for next year. So far, I can't describe the weight that has been lifted off of my attorneys for not having to do those post-convictions. We have given Tony Allegretti 8 files already, and it is at least 300 hours worth of work that we're saving. So I think in general, that's kind of it. I threw new vehicle on there because we do have a car that was generously donated to us by, I believe, probation last time around. It is a 2008. We have spent almost $1,000 in repairs on that vehicle this year alone, and it is fundamentally dead. We're still trying to drive it, but we need one in the future. That is a capital asset replacement issue. But in our last car, there was no money for a car. So it said we could replace it, but it didn't fund it. I believe we are trying to fix that. So that's why new car is on there. We do have a special fund. It's the Public Defender Automation Fund. It's pretty new. Doesn't have a lot of money in it. I didn't even really know about it until we started prepping for this process. So yay, we have $6,000. I'm not sure what we're going to do with it, but I do plan on spending it this year. So whatever we bring in, it's for the support of technology. So to the extent that we need new machines or infrastructure to support our new electronic filing, I will probably use it for that. It doesn't make a lot of money, but whatever's there, I'm going to try to use it to the benefit of the office. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Stephanie.
Anybody else can go first. I apologize. Is the new car, I don't see the new car on this. Is that on the car? I haven't gotten that far. Is it on it? One of the things too to remember for this office, we had decided to fund the legal secretary, but we funded that from existing non-spent because there wasn't anybody in them positions for the public defender's office. So just so we're clear, this budget reflects both continuing that legal secretary. And do you have a sense of how much, I could see what the overall staff increase is. It's like about $211,000. How much of that is being driven by, do you know by any chance?
Including benefits, it's probably 45 to 50,000.
Okay, so just so you know, we essentially outside of the budget process already gave and that increase is reflected in here. So I just want to make sure that everybody just remembers that. That is not to say that you should or should not get your other positions. I just wanted to make sure. I feel like it's a memo on this one sheet. I just wanted to make sure that we were conscious of the fact that in this particular case, it's not just salary increases, but it's driven by a decision this body made. And we did not, and I don't anticipate anybody on this board wants to reverse that decision, because the only way to reverse that decision would be to say, well, I hope you've enjoyed that admin assistant, but we're not giving it to you. You know what I mean? So I think we've made that decision. We should live with it. So I like the way that this is budgeted, but this would be sort of the opportunity, if anybody thinks differently, to signal that now. Okay.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Jen.
Just a couple questions. I know you purposely held back on hiring on a few positions so we could get people in, so you could fund needs at the time. So what areas are we still suffering in for not having enough attorneys in the office?
Well, so I I am short-staffed, one person, I need another person in another felony courtroom. I could really use a specialty court attorney. I do drug court right now. And I had to send an email to the judges that said, please don't start any of my jury trials on Monday because I have drug court. So I am being pulled in a lot of different directions. I would very much like to have somebody in as like a floater position to do specialty courts, help with arraignment court and pretrial fairness act stuff, because we don't even know yet what that's going to look like, except that it's going to be bad, because we're going to have to staff a lot more hearings and do a lot more prep. And arraignment court, when you add the detention hearings on top of arraignment court, we're going to have trouble staffing that, I think. So I could use one more attorney in misdemeanors. That would be the 3, I think. I think we're handling traffic court fine with 3. We could use 4 technically, but what I really, really need is a new felony attorney stat. Nobody wants to transfer. I mean, all the PD offices in the state are having the same problem. There's a Zoom every 2 weeks with all the chief PDs, and everyone says the same thing. We're all trying to steal from each other, which doesn't go over very well for camaraderie at the state level. But that being said, I mean, the counties are subsuming 2 positions into 1 and using that to fund just 1 extra attorney. So the fact is that there's just not a lot of people who want this job for this amount of money. And mostly the interest that we get are from new attorneys who are, raring to go. They got the fire, they got the mission, they want to do it. They either haven't passed the bar yet, or they are getting offered 3 times what I can pay them by a firm, and they want to pay their student loans off before they come work for me. Wow. Yeah, who could blame them? But yeah, so I'm not going to have any luck, I don't think, for the rest of this year. So I'm just focusing on maintaining until we get to next summer, and then I should have a whole crop of really good applicants.
Okay. What kind of things is the car used for that you might need to have replaced or repaired?
So we have an investigator, and my investigator is responsible for going wherever he needs to go to conduct interviews, gather evidence. When we had a situation where just a couple of weeks ago, he had to take the car to Chicago because there was some property that had been allegedly taken that needed to be returned, and the person didn't have transportation, so he went up to get the property and bring it back. He travels all over the state of Illinois in that car. If the car wasn't such a piece of junk, I'd probably drive it to Kankakee to visit my clients, but I'm actually afraid of it, so I'm not driving it. I'm driving my car, which is, very unlike my politics, a total gas guzzler, but I love it. So that's mileage costs. We could save mileage costs by doing those jail trips with the car.
Okay, and one last thing, and I apologize for the groans this is going to elicit. If there was a county-owned box truck available, don't even bother. Sorry.
Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Next up, our state's attorney, we've got Julia and Matt, so it's kind of like a tag team.
First of all, can I ask whose idea this was? Because awkward. Is it okay if I sit down? Okay, thanks. I'm going to sit down. Okay, hi everyone. Huh? Well, right, and I'm not on trial or whatever, so. And it's so nice to see John Farney. So nice. Okay. There. Yes, thank you. Okay, I want to start out actually kind of following up on something that Liz said about the car situation. I do think in the long term that it would be worthwhile thinking about a county-wide vehicle pool instead of each of us coming to you and telling you how old our cars are that we've managed to beg or borrow or not steal from other agencies or departments or that sort of thing. I too have a car. It too is a piece of crap. I do know that other counties have actual vehicle pools that they, loan out to pretty much everyone in the county when they need them. So something to think about in the long run. Okay. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over the general concept of our budget, I don't think. I want to kind of really focus on what we're asking for. We're not really asking for any changes in commodities. Things are generally the same as they always have been. There's a slide about our support enforcement budget. There's really nothing. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that. But, you know, support enforcement, we have a contract with the state. They send us money, we do the services and pay our staff out of that money. So there's really nothing to talk about on support enforcement. Similarly, there's a slide about the automation fund. Again, really not anything to talk about there. It's a fund, we use it. There's also a slide about drug asset forfeiture fund. Similar, I think the sheriff already talked about drug asset forfeitures. Basically, that is when law enforcement is doing an investigation and they are able to seize vehicles or money that they find in the course of a drug investigation. And then we forfeit those funds, and we get 12% of those, and the rest of it is divvied up between the state and local law enforcement agencies. We use that money to fund a lot of things in the office, training, a lot of our supplies. I have used that money to modernize equipment in my office. So I have access to a fund that other departments might not have. So if you come into my office and you see that my employees have standing desks, that's because I'm paying for them out of my drug asset forfeiture fund, because I care about their backs and their shoulders and that sort of thing. And I have access to, you know, a guy who can sell me standing desks. So I use that money to try to make life in my office good for my attorneys. And it doesn't cost the county anything because it comes out of drug asset forfeitures. And the past couple of years, we've done really well there because we've forfeited a Lamborghini and because the state police stopped a big truck on the highway that had thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in cash in duffel bags in the truck, along with a lot of drugs. And so we got a nice chunk of money out of that and out of the sale of the truck. So those kinds of things. And so that's really just dependent on what's going on in that arena. I do want to comment, and I have no issue with anything that the public defender is asking for, any of the staff she's asking for, but my paralegal's job is to manage drug asset forfeitures. So there is income that supports her job, in addition to 75 other things that she does. That's the main part of her job. So there is an income stream that helps support her fund. It's not direct, but I say indirectly, you know, she is a revenue builder, I guess, would be something that I would say. So again, that's really all I wanted to say about drug asset forfeiture fund and automation fund, same thing. So really what Matt and I are here to talk about are the things that we are asking for. And I understand everybody's asking for things, but, you know, we're here to ask you for things, and your job is to figure out whether or not we're going to get the things, and if not, you know, and decide what money you have and what you're gonna, you know, what you're gonna spend it on. So we are asking for 3 new positions, basically. We're asking for 3 new positions. The first position that we're asking for is an assistant state's attorney in our civil division. Matt Bannock here is the chief of my civil division, and you all should know him because he does an amazing job on your behalf as well as on behalf of the entire county government organization. And he put together this great slide that tells you all the things that Matt and his 2 attorneys do for you from A to Z. So you can read through that from administrative services, animal control, auditor, board of health, blah, 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 all the way down to zoning board of appeals. They are truly jacks of all trades. They are available at a moment's notice to answer a wide variety of questions about everything from A to Z and in between. And there are 3 of them, and that is a lot of work for 3 attorneys. So I'm going to stop talking, let Matt chime in on what exactly he's needing when it comes to the civil division. But before I do that, I do want to note, I think that some of you met with Joel Fletcher on the Carl litigation. I want to remind you that Carl litigation has been going on for
11 years.
11 years. And Joel Fletcher, one attorney in my office, has represented the county in that litigation for 11 years by himself. 11 years ago, I should have come to you and demanded that you hire outside counsel to handle that case. Because Joel at that time was in the civil division, he took it on. He has since moved on to the criminal division. So on top of the Carl case, he is also handling a full criminal caseload. That includes next week going to trial on a child abuse sexual assault case. Okay, so you are getting more than your money out of Joel Fletcher and out of the work that we have done for the Carl case would have cost you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in outside counsel fees if we had done that 11 years ago. So I just need to throw that in front of you as we're talking about why we need an additional attorney in the civil division. Matt.
Because we are by far the most efficient dollars you can spend in the attorney work arena. And I think it can be easy to think that the state's attorney's office is just about criminal prosecution, which is obviously a huge part of the mission of the state's attorney's office, hugely important to public safety and healthy living in the county. But me and my two other attorneys and half of Joel do everything else. And when we say we represent all of the county departments, I prepared this slide so that anyone who's not thinking actively about, oh, how many different divisions could that possibly be, that's how many divisions there are. And I resolved to myself that I'm not going to out any particular department as to who occupies the most part of our time, because it is cyclical. It varies from time to time. Sometimes some people will be going through contract negotiations and they will take weeks and weeks and weeks of our time, and I'll lose one or two attorneys completely to that black hole of problems that need to be solved. And then at any given time, any one of these departments can call us up, email us, and we can try and get a response to them either immediately or within the next 15, 20 minutes, and answer those questions that can either be done with a 15-minute phone call to do things ahead of time, answer promptly. And all I can ask, I won't put them on the spot, but if you can look around the room at anybody who works in administrative services, and if I ask implicitly if we're pretty responsive when called, I hope they nod their heads. And if we have a notion about how many times we might get called in a given week or month or over the past year, I would hope we would also get a bunch of head nods. But this slide for this number of departments, this is the vast universe that we have 3 attorneys to deal with, and each of us has our own specialties. I'm absolutely ecstatic with the 2 attorneys I have, but we can only be jacks of all trades so much, and I would very, very much like to add one more person who would come in with their own skill set to add to the attorney skills that we have to provide to all these people. And can we do next slide, please? Because the topics within those departments that we cover can be all of that stuff. And I tried not to make the font too small, but I tried to cover at least everything. Some of these are a topic that can take weeks and months of work, just simply the attorney work that goes into assisting with our collective bargaining agreements and walking all of those through that long process is huge. Dealing on a day-to-day basis, sometimes a minute-to-minute basis on grievances, counseling department heads on how to appropriately deal with personnel situations is huge. And it can be everything from a small question about, hey, how do I handle this very sensitive, difficult issue with an employee that I have that you want a confidential and correct legal answer about, to multi-million-dollar questions, what Joel's been doing with the Carl litigation, stuff about, PTEL, or like there's a new statute about combating recording fraud, or advising on weird subpoena issues that come in. Someone that's subpoenaing something from the CAC that they shouldn't be able to get, we jump to and immediately do. I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to, again, out any particular department, because most importantly, I want all of them to feel free to pick up the phone and call us at a moment's notice, and they do. And we're becoming victims of our own success in that because I feel like we have great relationships with our departments. They do call us very regularly, and we do pick up the phone, but that means that we're very, very busy. And I think those of you who have heard me in either county board meetings or in litigation committee have noted that I often will say, and I'll repeat again here, I believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And myself and our attorneys, we want to be constantly out there going to and working with our departments to provide those small bits of advice and those small course corrections so that we can do the right thing in the right way at the front end, so that we are not dealing with paying outside counsel or dealing with massive litigation costs later. And I can't prove a negative. I can't prove how much money we save you by, making sure someone does it in this way so that we don't get sued. But I think it's a lot, and that's why we show up and we answer the phone every time as quickly as we can to get people the advice that they need to do the right thing in the right way. Because that's the thing, is it's getting more and more complicated to administer county government every single day, every week. New laws. We could not just rest on our laurels and say this is how we did it 10 years ago, because that's constantly changing. And whether you agree with new legislation or not, at the end of the day, that's the law of the land, and we have to help our departments administer that law and do so correctly. And so we're going to keep doing that to make sure we're right going forward. So that's my spiel for now. Right, kick it over to you.
Good spiel.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so in addition to a new attorney in the civil division, we are also asking for 2 new staff members to assist with the additional legislative requirements that have been put on prosecutors' offices with the Pretrial Fairness Act that goes into effect on September 18th of this year. So the Pretrial Fairness Act is going to require that states' attorneys' offices do a lot more work at the front end when it comes to requesting that an individual be detained pending trial in a case. We are going to have to file a petition requesting that an individual be detained. We are going to have to do a lot more work on the front end when it comes to doing research and preparing a mini hearing that's going to have to take place within 48 hours. And we also have requirements under the Pretrial Fairness Act to notify victims of that process and of their right to seek a protective order during that process, again, at the very early stages of the criminal process. And so because of that, I'm asking to add 1 administrative legal secretary to assist with the clerical aspects that are going to be required, and 1 victim witness advocate. I'll start talking about the victim witness advocate. I do have 3 victim witness advocates currently. I have previously had 4 victim witness advocates on my staff. And again, victim witness advocates, they serve a very important role. They are the link between the attorneys in my office and the victims and witnesses who are put into situations that they absolutely did not ask to be put into, who are traumatized, who are angry, who are hurt, who are confused, who are scared, who have suffered losses in this community, and who need that kind and gentle assistance as they go through this very traumatic process. I have 3 amazing victim witness advocates who do this work, and these are statutory requirements. Under Illinois law, there is a Victims' Bill of Rights that requires the prosecutor's office to provide certain services to victims. That includes notification, that includes assistance with filling out paperwork for financial support from the state, that includes going with them to court and sitting with them through the process, that includes helping them receive notification if somebody is sentenced to the Department of Corrections and they want to get notification if that person is going to be out. All of those things are statutory requirements under Illinois law for victims to receive those supports from the prosecutor. And so we've had 3, and we do have a a grant that we've received from the state, and that has been increased, but it does not cover the complete cost, the complete salary for one of the three of those advocates. And I certainly would try to find money wherever I could if it was available. One of my three advocates currently is Spanish speaking. That is absolutely essential, particularly as our Spanish speaking population in our community increases. And she supports domestic violence victims and assists them even with the paperwork that they need when it comes to immigration issues, if they're seeking immigration supports because of their status as a victim of a crime. She is absolutely vital, and unfortunately, I try through my budget process to compensate her for the extra work and skill level that she has. But it's not, something that's specific in our policies or anything like that. But in any case, I had 4 advocates, and I had one individual who was out on a variety of medical leave issues and ended up leaving the office. And so for quite a while, we were working with 3, and I had an opportunity to add another investigator to my staff. And instead of coming to you and asking for another position, if you look at my full-time employee positions, I've been very stagnant for quite a long time. I decided to experiment, I guess, and try to change that 4th victim advocate position to a investigator position. And the second investigator has been a fantastic addition to the staff. He is a very skilled and knowledgeable retired Champaign police officer who also has allowed us to have a relationship with the U.S. Marshals Service. So he is affiliated with the Marshals Service, and he had to have a home base to be able to do that. And through his work with the Marshals Service has assisted in locating and arresting very violent and dangerous offenders, both from Champaign County as well as from across the state. He has been involved in investigations that have resulted in drugs, getting drugs off the street, getting guns off the street. He recently received an award from the Marshals Service to acknowledge his good work and the accomplishments that he has made. And we get funding from the Marshals Service to offset his salary as well. So in addition to his duties helping us find witnesses, bring the witnesses to court, keep them safe, do the investigative roles in our office, he's also out helping not just Champaign County, but the rest of the state. And again, we're getting reimbursement funding through that. But I'm going to say that experiment while it's been good as far as having that additional investigator, has been difficult on the 3 victim advocates in my office, and is only going to be more difficult now that under the Safety Act, we're required to notify victims of an impending detention hearing and give them an opportunity to come forward and get a protective order. The Act very specifically says we have to notify them before that initial hearing, which is going to happen within 24 to 48 hours of an arrest. And so I'm going to have to really restructure and have somebody who's available for those people. And so I'm asking to get back to my level of 4 victim advocates in order to be able to accomplish that and to continue doing the work that we need to do for crime victims in our community. And similarly, the administrative legal secretary position. If you came to my office, I've got, how many? I've got 9 AFSCME secretaries on the criminal side, and they each support 3 to 4 attorneys. So it's not a 1-to-1 ratio at all. So each one of my secretaries is currently supporting 3 to 4 attorneys. And that's a lot of work. And what that means is that the attorneys are doing a lot of clerical work themselves, and they're not able to spend the time doing the attorney work that they need to do because they're the ones having to draft petitions, file petitions, sometimes pull their own files, all kinds of things. Jamala, I'm sorry, I keep looking at you because I need you to help me out here because she understands. I have an amazing group of support staff. They are amazing, and I am lucky to have them, but they are overworked and underpaid, and I need another one because of the amount of work that we're going to have to do now with the addition of the Safety Act. So those are the 3 positions that we're asking for. And then I've put together a little PowerPoint for you all to talk about attorneys and the attorney salary scale that we have here in Champaign County. And I'm doing this, on my behalf, but also the public defender's office, because our attorneys are all in the same salary grade. And so my request for this consideration is not just for me, but also for the attorneys in the public defender's office. So Matt told you all the things that the assistant state's attorneys who in the civil division do for you, and I will tell you that they are incredibly underpaid for the work that they do for you. And I also know that they have had opportunities to leave. And I don't know if it's the standing desks that keeps them with us, but honestly, we can laugh about that a little bit, but those are the things that I have to do in order to make, the day-to-day working environment, good in my office, because the pay level that what we are paying attorneys in Champaign County government is significantly lower than any of the attorneys in my office and in the public defender's office would be able to make out in private practice. And people leave the state's attorney's office and the public defender's office because they are able to find something else that pays better. That is the vast majority of the reason why attorneys leave. And like Liz told you, on the prosecutor side, we are all, it is an employee market. We are all struggling to get attorneys to come in to entry-level positions in prosecutors' offices across the state. The number of kids who are going to law school has decreased dramatically over the years, and the ones who are coming into law school are older. They have prior career experiences, and that gives them a path, a direction that they're going to go in with their law degree. And so they're not looking at prosecutors' offices, at public defenders' offices, the way that they used to when there were so many of them going directly from undergrad to law school and coming out and saying, maybe I'll try this thing. Okay, so it's a very different employee pool that we have available to us. So in Champaign County, on the screen, you can see our attorneys, both public defender and state's attorney's offices, are in a particular range that is comparable to our grade J salaries. A minimum starting salary of $56,639 and a max of $97,472. That minimum salary has gone up over the years, but we have had that compression that you've talked about a little bit earlier. And so we might be raising the minimum, but we're not really compensating the middle people. And so I have to do some mathematical juggling around to try to make sure that people are being compensated fairly. So that is comparable to your grade J employees outside of the attorneys. So the attorneys are in their own little line, but it's comparable to grade J. And then there's a grade K that has a number of different types of employees across the county. And the grade K range is 63,709 to 95,584. I don't know where these numbers come from, but this is what the grades are. So there's a grade K, and then grade L is my supervisor staff and the public defender supervisors. So I have lead prosecutors, division chiefs like Matt, the first assistant public defender are all in your grade L, 72,723 to 107,625. I first looked at comparables within the county, and one thing I looked at is education requirements. So to be an attorney, obviously you got to go to law school. So that's 3 years postgraduate education after college. They have lots of loans to repay, and so they are they have a higher education requirement. So for our Champaign County positions in both grade J and K, so the comparable grade and then the one higher, 6 of those positions in J and K only require a high school diploma. 4 of them only require high school plus some experience. So high school diploma, same starting salary as attorney. 3 of them require associates, so 2 years of an associate's degree, same salary as an attorney starting salary. 8 of them require bachelor's degrees, and 3 of those are in the higher grade. So bachelor's degree, same starting salary or higher. Bachelor's plus 2 to 5 years of experience, which is sort of similar to going to law school. 13 of those. So you wouldn't have any of the law school loans or any of that sort of thing. You wouldn't have spent 3 years in higher education, and you can work in jobs in Champaign County making the same or higher starting salary. There is only one job in Champaign County that requires a postgraduate degree in those grades, and it is in the higher grade. So degree education-wise, my attorneys are in a much lower grade than they should be. Liz's attorneys are in a much lower grade than I believe they should be, compared to their internal colleagues in Champaign County. Looking outside of Champaign County, if you want to flip the switch there. Again, employers market. We're all competing for the same candidate pool for the reasons I gave you. So I talked to my colleague in Sangamon County, which has a comparable population to us. In 2022, they did a salary review and increased their attorneys about $10,000 at each level. So they have different levels. They call it ASA 1, ASA 2, ASA 3, Senior Assistant State's Attorney. And in each of those levels, they increased their starting salaries about $10,000. So from 53 to 64, from 59.3 to 70, et cetera, et cetera. So Sangamon County had the same issues that we're having, and they did a salary review and increased their salaries to a level, again, that I think is comparable with our grade K salaries that I'm proposing attorneys should be comparable to. And the next one. And then finally, I looked at some other local comparables. So the federal government, assistant U.S. attorneys, and I got this information from one of my assistant state's attorneys who went to the U.S. attorney's office. And I tried to get him back, and he said, I'm sorry, but there's no way. As much as I love you, Julia, I'm not coming back. Because in Champaign County, the starting salary for an assistant U.S. attorney with no experience at all is $66,385, and they have a lot of benefits, including a matching 401k. They have paid parental leave, much longer than the 1 week that we have, significant benefits to being at the U.S. Attorney's Office. The city of Champaign, I don't even understand it, but the city of Champaign assistant city attorney's salary $99,584 to $127,000. So that is a plum job, and that's just their basic assistant city attorney. And I believe one of the public defenders from the public defender's office, assistant public defender, went to the city of Champaign for that much higher salary, obviously. Local private attorneys firms, I asked around, they all tell me they would start either a salary or what they call a draw, meaning you get what you kill. Basically, there's a percentage that you get, and their starting salary or draw would be from $65,000 to $80,000 for an entry-level attorney. So these are what we're competing with locally as well as statewide and internally. So I'm asking for you all to consider that our attorneys, all of whom, again, many of whom in my office have had opportunities and offers from outside firms, from other state's attorneys' offices to leave for higher salaries, that they deserve an increase across the board. And so I'm asking you to move them up comparable to my colleague in Sangamon County, an additional about $10,000 a person, would make them, I believe, more in an appropriate range. And I know Stephanie's looking at me like I'm insane, but I'm putting it out there in the middle of the room because it's a conversation that needs to happen. I have been, I'm the longest serving countywide official, and I've been through 2009. I've been through cuts. I've been through, you're getting nothing and don't even ask for it. But I am at a point now where I need to ask you for some things, and I hope that you consider it on behalf of the staff in my office and the people that we serve.
Questions, comments? Stephanie?
Actually, no, I was going to say I appreciate it. Julie and I have been talking about this for a while now, and I think I said pretty bluntly, make your case, and I appreciate you've done a nice job making the case. I just want to make sure I understand this last issue. This isn't on the unfunded list, I don't think, but I'm assuming this kind of increase wasn't built into the budget. Am I correct in both of those assessments? Okay, so I think what the next step would be to cost this out and add that to the unfunded chart, because I think we need to be able to have that conversation. And if we're going to cost it out, we should do it for both the PD's office and the SA's office, because I don't see how we'd jump one up and not the other. You're costing out, what would it cost to move everybody to K? Yeah, what would it cost? Let's do that. Let's cost out, what would it cost to move everybody to K? Let's just not make our lives, yeah, because we couldn't bring in new people at a different level and leave our old people back there in the dust and J. So,
K is within J.
I'm sorry, what?
Unless I'm reading this incorrectly. Am I reading this incorrectly?
This is not within J. Attorneys are in J. K doesn't have anything in it that's attorney.
Right, but the range of K is 63,709 to 95,584, and the range of J is 56,600 to 97,472. So the spread of K is in J. So I need some clarification on what I'm costing.
Actually, it's not really that. Is the attorney range 56 to 97? I don't know where these numbers come from. K is 63 to 95. J is something a little bit lower.
I believe she's just asking for the attorneys, so maybe if we had a number, that would make it easier for Michelle and Tammy to work on. It's not a whole it's a number of attorneys that you have in mind that need to be jumped up.
I make it absolutely easy. I'm asking that every attorney in my
go.
my office and in the public defender's office gets a $10,000 a year raise.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so just to be clear, what's on this chart isn't J, it's the attorney
Right.
schedule.
J is
She's saying it's the most comparable to J. This isn't actually J. This is the attorney one, and that's its own thing.
right.
Okay.
Right, so I understand just adding to the current positions, but you've got the comparable is already within the ideal. Actually, the other way around, the ideal is within the comparable. So you're going to end up with compression if you just add money to the people that are currently in the office. Because the starting rate is still too low then, under this idea. So I can give you the cost of what it would be to just add 10,000 to everyone existing, but then the separate issue needs to be discussed of what is going forward to keep the new people not so far behind the current existing people at that point. Like you still need to address this range issue.
Yeah. I hear you. I guess what I'd ask for is, what would the cost be of moving the org chart of all attorneys, whether they exist or do not exist as actual human beings, to this grade? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just not doable because you've got probably, like 25, 30 attorneys total now who are all across that range. So, and it's a wide range. It's like a $40,000 range. So it's very difficult for me to give you a number that's anything accurate.
I see what you're
So
saying.
what we can do is if we start from the premise of adding 10,000 to everyone, we can take the lowest person then at that point and say if that's going to become our new floor, where does that take us?
I have a very good personnel attorney that can help you with these calculations. But we don't have a union, never had. We're usually very quiet, but this is why we've been lagging behind decade after decade. And to emphasize, again, just to jump in, even more than getting that fourth person in my division, I desperately do not want to lose the 2 I currently have. We need this to not lose the 2 we currently have.
I hear what you're saying, and it does seem like maybe we need to take Judge Rosenbaum's compression situation and put it into conversation with the grade conversation in order to come up with, you might need to look at both. No problem.
I can look at all of this.
Okay. I do have one question. Everybody else who came up said if I could get one of these personnel things, then I want this.
Wasn't that nice of them?
Okay.
I'm going to say the victim advocate position is very important because, again, I had 4. I went down to 3 in order to get somebody else without coming and asking for an additional position. And I am asking a lot of the 3 that I have. And we now have additional responsibilities under the Pretrial Fairness Act that are going to fall on these people. You know, and I was very frustrated. I was involved in the drafting and the negotiations on that Safety Act piece, and prosecutors across the state said, what do you mean, you know, to the drafters, what do you mean we have to give victims notification, you know? And they said, it was like, okay, how many of us are Schitt's Creek's fans? Okay, so it was like folding in the cheese, right? We said, what do you mean notification? They said, you know, you notify them. And we said, well, but how do we notify them? Well, you notify them. You know, well, a letter? Well, if I had to tell you that, then, you know, I would do it myself. Okay, so what do you mean? A phone call? I mean, calling up a victim of domestic violence and just saying, hey, just want to let you know there's a hearing tomorrow at 1:30 if you want to be there. I mean, it's not that simple. You know, there's going to be a long conversation. There's going to be, you know, resources that are needed to be discussed. There's going to be anger and sadness and terror and all the things, you know, and so, and it could be 5 phone calls or 15 phone calls in a day that need to be made. And so this is a really important situation. And we said to the state, to the legislators, well, you know, can you fund any of this? Can you fund some more victim advocates? And they said, oh, that's a great idea. We'll talk to you about that, you know, sometime in the future. So we are looking for additional funding. Across the state, prosecutors are looking for additional funding from the state for victim advocates. And if I get that, that would be fabulous. But this goes into effect, you know, in 3 weeks. And so that's why. So that's probably my main, if I can only have one, but Matt's going to hit me. He's kicking me under the table very subtly because the additional attorney position is key also.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
One of the reasons we put this budget hearing together over 3 days instead of 2 was to hopefully be able to hear more from the elected officials and the department heads, but also maybe to have, my anticipation was that there was going to be maybe more decision-making points this time than there had been in previous years. If you recall, last year, we literally didn't even have the special finance committee meeting at the end of September because at the end of the budget process, there was nothing that we felt like we needed to decide. I don't know that I think that's the case this year. And so I guess one of my questions is, now that we've heard of everything and we've heard from the state's attorney, I don't know that, like, are we I don't know if I'm comfortable with saying we're going to wait all the way to September 28th. I also don't know that I think it's fair to ask everybody, so what you think after this? I don't know, though, how to balance that. So I guess I am going to ask, does anybody, based on what we've just heard, have any initial thoughts on some of these decision-making points? Like, you know, I think we should prioritize, like, things you can say is, we're already $500,000 up, I don't think we should, you know, consider any of them, or I need more time to think about it, or I think we should be prioritizing things that have to do with the Safety Act. I mean, is anybody on the board? I think before we leave, we've only been here for, 2 hours, which is about how much we usually do in 2 days. So like, I guess my question is, like, does anybody want to speak into the space about anything we've heard? Because at some point, we need to start having that conversation.
Go ahead, JJ.
I'd like to speak to the state's attorney's budget first. We've sat through, like you said, 2 hours tonight. We've heard the Safety Act and the Pretrial Fairness Act brought up by virtually every office. This is the first time we've heard anything about victims' rights, and I thank you for that. I 100% support Julia's victim advocate position. Thank you.
Other comments? It's a lot to digest. I understand. Chris, go ahead.
We've heard good cases for every request. And I kind of really glommed on to the social worker mitigation specialist for the public defender. I think that's, I think that could be, that ought to be given high consideration.
Jamala.
I support Julia's victim advocate. I also support the mitigation and social work for the public defender. And I also support Judge Rosenbaum's request for his additional clerk. So I don't know what we do with all of that, but yeah.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Same thoughts as Jamala there, but I'm trying to figure out, I guess my digestion point here is trying to figure out how much of the funds that are coming in or that are in fund balances can be used to support these, or like, I don't want to depend on that kind of thing, but, thinking about like the drug asset forfeiture and like, can any of that be used for positions, or no, it's just stuff. Okay.
I guess, can I, point of information? Sure. Finance person who we won't have for too much longer, where's your comfort level in terms of where we're currently budgeted and additional requests? I don't know, does anybody else have any questions for the SA's office?
Thank you.
Wasn't quite prepared to speak to this tonight. First of all, the revenue to expenditure deficit of approximately 500,000 is still not 100%. We're still working through a few things even today. I've gone through budgets and found, we left this out. We missed this, revenue that we need to capture. So we're still working through that. Actually, just today finished the circuit clerk's budgets. I know there's been some salary changes that have been incorporated. So that number is not a hard number. That being said, I am not surprised by that number at all, particularly because, as you mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of one-time costs that we're going to be funding in 2024. I think I want to step back and just kind of do a bird's eye view. You're hearing from individual department heads and elected officials, there are a lot of needs. The county has been unable to fund a lot of these needs for many years. We did, with additional sales tax revenues in 2022, fund several positions for the first time ever. Can we fund all of these things you've heard tonight, plus the things you're going to hear the next 2 nights? Absolutely not. I think what also the board needs to understand, I know you've heard that fees and fines revenues are declining. CTAA, which was implemented, I think, in 2019, and then bond reform, they're going to have a significant impact on revenues. At the same time, we're experiencing demands for, increases in expenditures. The other thing is we have, over the last couple of years, we have experienced pretty strong property tax revenue growth, and that's because we've had good CPI in addition to some very strong new growth revenue in terms of new EAV added to the tax rolls. In 2024, that new EAV added to the tax rolls was cut in half. And decreases in CPI are not going to be long after. So it takes a while for all of that to work through the system. Sales tax growth has also been fairly strong, even through COVID, stronger than was expected. But I have seen in the last few months, those numbers have started to taper down. And in fact, some months, you know, if you look at the year ago period, are actually declines. Overall, I still have built in property or sales tax growth to the next fiscal year, but some of what we've experienced in terms of additional revenues are not going to be forever. They are going to taper down. So I think that this board does need to be very careful about adding multiple new positions with recurring cost year over year. And the other thing, I know you heard me say this during the financial forecast, we have a lot of structural problems within the salary administration program that we have that are preventing us from retaining staff. Does it make sense for us to keep adding new positions when we can't even keep the staff that we have? And that's what I said in the forecast. It's a balance. What's the right answer? I don't know. It's a balance. So, you know, this is something that normally at this level in the budget, we didn't have the capability to roll everything up and look at it, only because we have Munis now. We can kind of do that. So that's why we have those preliminary numbers. But another big thing that nobody talked about tonight, and this is your, justice group, except for the circuit clerk, is the justice case management system, multi-million-dollar system that's going to need replaced. Is not funded in full. We have a couple of pockets of funding that we may be able to get some initial support for. So I'm not really answering your question, Stephanie, but I'm kind of coming back and saying, I'm being the doomsday person. I do think that we would have the capacity to fund some positions, particularly when we are no longer, paying $3 million for out-of-county housing. So, but I just want to make sure that, there's a very cautious approach to that. And if I could also say, I would also encourage no one to make final or certain decisions in their mind about what they think is important until you hear everybody give their, requests.
Go ahead, Elliot.
This is somewhat of a procedural question. We heard a lot about compression and salary increases and the importance of retaining staff. If we were to look at all of that together across the county, how would we do that as part of the budget process? At what point can we make those decisions, is one question. And then a second question, which is more for the attorneys here, is when do we decide to use external counsel? And if we're talking about increasing on, in-house counsel, would that save us potentially a lot?
I'll speak to the compression issue real fast. I am working on a countywide plan for us to truly evaluate it, identify it, and be able to implement an actual plan to address the compression. It is highly complicated. You've got to throw in all of the union contracts and then the non-union members, and then it's a moving target, right? So it's dealing with compression as we're continuing to hire and promote people. So it is a very large, complex problem that, to be completely honest, I'm going to say we need professional assistance with. That's part of the plan. And I'm hoping to come back after the budget process for us to be able to talk about that concretely. But I have not had time to dive into that at this point with all the other terrible things that are happening.
Go ahead, Matt.
So as to hiring outside counsel, Julia, the state's attorney, is the attorney for the county and all county departments, and all of us who are her assistants have the ability to kind of step in and also be that counsel. So whenever the question of do we hire outside counsel comes up, it is Julie's decision. All in a practical matter, she's going to look at me and say, Matt, what do you think? And I'm going to say either we do or do not have the expertise to handle certain things in-house. And myself and the two other attorneys that we have right now, we're very good general practitioners, and some have some areas of specialty, like one is very good in personnel and labor negotiations law. Other ones deal with our mental health petitions, animal control, property stuff, et cetera, and honestly, it is my decision whether or not ethically I think we can competently assist the county, or if we're like, look, this is a brain surgery question and I'm a GP, I think we need a brain surgeon here. I think I've briefed the board in either litigation committee or other closed sessions about things where we needed a brain surgeon for very specialized work, but wherever we can avoid that and handle things in-house, provided we have the time, bandwidth, and are comfortable getting up on the expertise, I'm happy to do so. One specific concrete example that I would love to have additional skills in the civil division to deal with would be property stuff, of just doing real estate closings and some basic property things that just don't happen to be anything that either myself have done previously in litigation or the other guys have done. And it was just better when we had multi-million-dollar building purchases coming up to say, we're going to use this outside counsel to handle this multi-million-dollar closing and these negotiations, because y'all keep buying buildings like this last year, and it's come up quite a bit. I would be very happy to have someone with property law expertise that in future years, no knock on our current outside counsel because they do a fabulous job at a decent rate, but we're a lot cheaper, and I would love to have that experience in-house to do that.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
So as finance chair, I'm trying to think about like a way to foster this conversation that gets us to a resolution in a timely manner so we could build it into the budget process. So I have this as a suggestion. And I do appreciate Tammy's point, like we should hear from everybody before we start having, although I would say most of the personnel, almost all of the personnel requests come from what we heard tonight. There's two outliers in the admin that I think are maybe more, one of them is a pretty simple conversation. So I think in terms of personnel, this is the section that it seems like we don't have enough folks. So what if, I do feel like if we just wait till September 28th or 29th, whatever, that last Thursday in September, it might be a very difficult conversation if we're starting it from, hi, how you doing, right? I think we maybe need to have some steps to get us there. So here's my suggestion. What if at the cow, we will have heard from everybody. Everybody comes prepared to we could do a round robin at the end of finance. We could put it on the agenda. Everybody comes prepared to discuss their philosophy. So your philosophy should be, I think we should hold pat and wait till next year, we don't have money this year. Or your philosophy should be, I think we should prioritize retaining the current staff that we have. Or your philosophy could be, I think we should, my priorities are retaining current staff and doing things that are statutorily required of us, like implementing the Safety Act, right? So whatever it is, not getting into the nitty gritty of, I think we should do this person, but do a round robin of where everybody is, sort of, we've heard from everybody, like what philosophically do you want to do with personnel? And then at the full board, and everybody could go home and digest that. And then at the full board meeting on Thursday, there will be an opportunity if anybody wants to passionately advocate for a particular position or set of positions, right? And that could just be open. Just like, I really think it should be this. And everybody gets a chance. So then everybody could hear those cases that people are making. And then when we go to the special finance committee in September, we will have had all of that conversation and you will have a chance to have digested it. And then maybe we could get to a decision, because to be blunt, we have to come to a decision by that September meeting. And I just don't know, like, if we start the conversation from scratch, that we're gonna, and I'm not interested in a 14-hour meeting at that meeting either. So does that seem like a decent, if anybody has an alternative proposal or thoughts, does it seem like a decent step? So for the agendas, I guess we would need on the agenda, like, just to have budget conversation or something like that put on each one. But so that's what I'm thinking. Philosophical, like this is what I'm thinking in terms of budget priorities. There are a few things that are not personnel that are unfunded. The jury pool, right, is one of them. So when you have that, your philosophical conversation, one of your things might be, I think we should prioritize personnel versus, you know what I'm saying? And then and I'll make a more coherent charge for the last night of the budget hearing, and I'll say it to everybody at the end of the Wednesday night so that like it's a more concrete what I'm asking y'all to do at the cow. And then the full board can be a chance for anybody who wants to passionately make a case for a specific unfunded issue, and then we could hopefully arrive at a decision making. And I will probably, just to be blunt, be the philosophical person that is backing Tammy up and being like, let's be cautious. But that's my proposal.
As usual, you're usually about 2 steps ahead of me. I was hoping to roll it into the county board rather than have a special meeting. That seemed to make more sense. I do want to add a little bit just in terms of other things for board members to think about. You know, we just got through our negotiations, and we went, I think, as high as we could possibly go for salaries. And yeah, that's great. We've gotten through negotiations now. They will be coming around the bend much faster than you think they will be. And we are going to have staff that are going to be wanting to be compensated at a higher level, or we're going to have more losses. Another wild card is the VAC. And I thought that we had an agreement in terms of moving slower with this first year. That's been blown up. And I have no idea where it's going to end up. David will be talking with you on Wednesday. And I would hope that you can ask him some questions about what their plans are, because honestly, at this point, I can't tell you. Anyway, thank you.
We also have a 20% health insurance increase. So just to end the night on a high note.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, at this point, we are adjourned.